There are lonely aspects to a turnaround. You make a lot of decisions in quiet moments that you know are going to have impacts on people, and whether they be customers or suppliers or people that work with you or for you. Even in small towns that I've been in where you've had to close up places and move them elsewhere, I mean, that's not lost on me. Sparton was going through its own times that were awful rough. It had no direction. It had no business plan. It had no specific vision or mission as to who it was or wanted to become. It had a whole lot of buildings that were only partially full. It had a lot of contracts that had been either badly priced or were being badly executed on, and a lot of them were brand new. The quality systems were lacking, which meant that a good amount of what they did produce was less than ideal. It just had all the earmarks of a company that had just kind of gone astray. And it was certainly showing up in the financials. I mean, this company hadn't generated profit $1 for 3 years. It had levered up its balance sheet with debt. It was in a position where the remaining credit was simply going to run out. And we found ourselves, having joined in November of '08, early December of that time frame, staring down the barrel of probably 90 days of life left to us. I was probably a general manager long before I should have been, frankly, but learned very quickly the role and got good results, and took away from it a lot of good lessons about what it took to turn things around as quickly as possible. Started with larger companies, namely General Motors, moved on to United Technologies. That's probably the time and place where my involvement in turnarounds really started. From there, I got myself involved with smaller enterprises, whether they were private or public, and that's where I've stuck to my knitting since. I mean, that's what I enjoy. There were 3 opportunities, and this was the most difficult, this was the smallest, this was the highest of risk, frankly. I knew and understood what was wrong with it. I've had the good fortune of working with a group of men and women that know how to work in that environment. I knew that I wasn't ultimately going to be in it alone, and decided that like a doctor, I guess, would diagnose a patient, you kind of knew what treatment it needed, and so you just kind of jumped in the deep end of the pool and invited others to get in there with you, and before you know it, it kind of worked itself out. It's a 100-plus-year-old company, which in and of itself is, I think, is fascinating and pretty impressive. It's impressive in so many different ways. I'm the company's 5th CEO in all those 114, 15 years. That's not typical. Such diverse types of end markets. Way back when, they were just a fundamental manufacturer of things such as garden rakes and hoes. And then they went to work with and partnered with the Ford family as the automotive industry scaled up outside of Detroit. Eventually, they started to scale their way up. They got involved in radios, tabletop radios, and then from there, they started to involve themselves in more complex and diverse electronics. And fast forward a couple of decades, probably, and they decide that there are things they shouldn't be in, things they should be in. They got out of automotive. Now they're exclusively in the electronics field. Things such as anti-submarine warfare at the outset of that technology development. They're at the very, very forefront. They've supported aero and defense projects. They acquired some medical business. And then things started to probably unravel a bit. There was no shortage of threats in this business at the time we started this turnaround. Any one customer could have left on their own accord. Any one supplier could have chosen that they weren't going to stand around and wait for us to pay their bills and just stop supplying. Key employees could have walked out at any time. It was a precarious walk trying to keep all of those parties involved, making sure that employees were engaged and that our customers were engaged and our suppliers stayed engaged. I spent a lot of time talking with a lot of suppliers directly, going through what our expectations and planning looked like. And on the heels of having heard that time and again for a number of years, I guess I feel pretty fortunate that they listened and believed us. The same thing for customers. So had any one of those things walked out on us, it was a house of cards. Things just simply would have collapsed, and this business probably wouldn't exist as it does today. While we're a public company and all of our financials are out there, I don't think there was a real appreciation for how bad it was. And then the more conversations you started having either with top leadership or middle management or even the folks that work day in and day out on the floor, they had absolutely no idea that this company was at a near liquidity crisis, bankruptcy. And the company never would have been the same. I think there was a certain low point when people really realized we were going to move fast and we were going to make some decisions, and those decisions were going to have direct effects on their lives. We certainly financially incentivized people to stay engaged. We extended benefits beyond what we were originally planning to do. We had offered every individual in the facilities we closed to move with us. We offered them new opportunities somewhere else. We offered financial incentives to make that move. And I actually, on a personal level, feel pretty good about that. We had started having conversations with this company early in the calendar year '08. A lot of that time I had spent in and out of facilities, getting acquainted with management, understanding its end markets, its customers, its contracts. That was time well spent. When we joined then in November, we had already mapped out exactly the things that needed to happen and the key priorities. It was all the fundamentals and really took its roots back to what is now known as our Sparton production system. So we had mapped out what that should have looked like in terms of what were priorities, who was going to do them, how quickly they needed to be done, and I think we did a fantastic job of executing them as fast as possible. We were frankly profitable at an op income line within 90 days. So the 100-day plan served its purpose exactly as we hoped. Well, the first quarter, it was tense at best, is the way to describe it. You were constantly chasing after cash, whether it was incoming cash or outgoing cash, and we dealt with that multiple times on a daily basis. You were dealing with, at the same time, regular calls from suppliers and customers being frustrated about all the things they deserve to be frustrated by. And then you had the uncertainty of a new CEO and what he's going to do next across all the folks in the business. So I spent probably an unprecedented amount of time on phones and in meetings and in discussions assuring people that we knew where we were going, what we were doing, and what the results were going to be. There was an onslaught of initiatives that were started in that early couple of quarters. So, I still, in my mind's eye, I can still remember long days. I can still remember working on the weekends. I can still remember sitting in a dark office with nothing but one light on, and it's 10, 11 o'clock at night on a Sunday. It was a battle. It's one that I'm glad I went through. I look back now, and it was a pretty unique opportunity. We really had a three-prong approach to growth. There were certain product capabilities from within that we wanted to leverage. So we had invested in some level of internal research and development so that we could introduce some of our own IP into alternative end markets. The second leg of that approach was to bring in the right people, refresh the company's identity and branding, focus its message, go to market in all the best ways you could, and grow the company organically with its focused capabilities. And then the last was to acquire key assets, whether they were additional capabilities, whether it was in a key geography we wanted to be, even if it was an extension of end markets with different customers, and then that allowed us to then service them further. And in some cases, we've acquired businesses where those accounts have just exploded because we've been able to help them better understand how they can go to market using our services. And we've doubled accounts with some customers given our expertise in that way. So that really has been our approach. This is a board in the early '09 timeframe that was probably a little bit nervous, new CEO, just come off the heels of a fairly turbulent liquidity crisis. I think they had a great deal of confidence in me and the team, and they demonstrated that. But for them to support an acquisition as early as what they did, I'm thankful for. It allowed us to do a lot of good things moving forward. We grew in this last fiscal year 5% organic, net of any influence from any of the acquisitions. The year before that, we grew almost 10% organically. I'm pleased with those numbers. It's not as good as it could be, but I think it's probably not a bad start for a company that had a tarnished reputation. Not because of what it was capable of doing, only because of how it was run, given what its potential was. I've had certain either shareholders or prospective investors, or sometimes even my own management team, say, boy, those are ambitious goals. I don't know if we can do that. Or, are you sure you want to tell everybody that's where you're going? Or, by you telling everybody that's where you're going, you got investors modeling it out, which means you basically have telegraphed expectations. I kind of see it a bit different. And that is that I serve the people in this company. And part of the way I serve the people in this company is I give solid direction and guidance about where we're going. And then I remove all the barriers and I produce all the enablers to make it happen. And part of that direction, I think, is to very clearly articulate who are our customers, how do we serve them, what can they expect from us, what types of products are we going to make and not make, what are our ambitions to grow, so that translates into organic growth targets, it translates into merger and acquisition targets and expectations. I think when you've got that out there, people have a real clear vision of where we're going, and then more importantly, what's their role. I have a few takeaways from my Spartan experience. Be decisive, have the right support cast, have a team with talents and I'm fortunate that I've surrounded myself with a bunch of people that are far smarter than I ever thought about being, and I have absolutely no shame in that in the least. Every function is supported by a functional expert that knows it better than anybody else, but is versatile enough to get involved in everybody else's function as well. When I have a staff meeting or a regular strategy discussion or whatever it may be, they're pretty spirited, and I want that. So I think having a good team, having a spirited team, having a talented team, making good decisions based on data. When we closed and consolidated facilities, it would have been very easy, and I would have gained a whole lot more in the way of popularity if that was my objective, to keep them open. But I knew that we couldn't do that. I knew we couldn't survive it. I knew we couldn't afford it. So, I think in summary, the thing that I take from the experience that I would say to somebody who's, maybe entering into it or wants to know what are the takeaways from a turnaround, have data and use it, be decisive, have a good team, don't get emotional. I think that this is, while an evolving organization, a very impressive place to be.